Russia-Ukraine news. Ukraine and Russia are competing for leadership roles at the BRICS summit. While Russia is busy trying to maintain its major alliances in Africa, the Ukrainian government has seen an opening to expand its diplomatic ties with the continent. Russia and Ukraine are looking to the BRICS summit in Johannesburg this week as a way to cement international relationships as they compete for influence. The BRICS summit brings together the main players of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa with dozens of other countries outside the global West. After decades of neglect, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba recently stated that his country would increase its strategic outreach to African partners. After saying that many years have been lost, he declared, "But we are going to push ahead with a Ukrainian-African renaissance, revive these relations." Kuleba argued, "We don't want to be another Russia," referring to the coercion, corruption, and fear that Russia uses to maintain its power in many African countries. Instead of trying to unseat Russia, our focus is on releasing Africa from Moscow's shackles. His list of countries where Russian influence is eroding included Liberia, Kenya, Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, Mozambique, Rwanda, and Equatorial Guinea. Nonetheless, Russia maintains a sizable military and diplomatic footprint across much of Africa. It has helped several countries beef up their security, especially through the mercenary group Wagner, which has played a significant role in the anarchy in Libya and the instability in the Central African Republic. Wagner's chief Yevgeny Prigozhin has publicly criticized the Kremlin's handling of the Ukrainian invasion, and he even led what appeared to be an insurrection against Putin's rule for a short time before agreeing to leave Russia for Belarus. With Wagner's fate up in the air and the Russian military floundering in Ukraine, the Kremlin lacks the resources it once did. The upshot of this is that the annual BRICS summit, which brings together the governments of Brazil, China, Russia, India, and South Africa, will be overshadowed by Russia's ongoing machinations in Africa. South Africa in particular will be under intense scrutiny for its often ambiguous stances toward Vladimir Putin's regime, even though Putin himself will not be present in person but via video link to avoid being arrested on an international criminal court warrant. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa's ties to the Kremlin have come under fire from governments aligned with Ukraine ever since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. According to the U.S. ambassador in Pretoria, South Africa supplied weapons to a Russian ship that docked in Cape Town last year on its way home, despite the country's official position of neutrality in the conflict. This claim was made in May. Putin would have been free to attend the BRICS summit in person without worrying about an international arrest warrant soon after Ramaphosa granted him immunity despite the warrant. He declined, anyway. South Africa and other African countries' continued openness to Russia may seem strange to Westerners in light of Russia's aggression in Ukraine. However, Professor Stephen Chan of the School of Oriental and African Studies argues that the ANC-led South African government's receptiveness to Putin should come as no surprise. Throughout his decades-long career, Chan has advised a variety of African and European governments. There is a very long affiliation with Russia in many parts of southern Africa, particularly in South Africa itself, he said. The West has a short memory, but while it supported the apartheid governments, Russia gave support to the ANC in exile and went one step further by sponsoring Cuban armed forces in Angola, who twice turned back the tide of South African military advance. He used a key moment in the long war in Angola as an illustration of how South Africa's defeat accelerated the end of apartheid. South African forces with the intention of creating a buffer state in southern Angola were defeated in 1988 at the Battle of Quito-Quanavale. After the National Party of South Africa realized that violence was no longer an effective tool in resisting change, a palace coup ousted the party's hawks and installed the more moderate F.W. de Klerk as president. Before Mandela's release in 1990, he met with Zambia's president, Kenneth Kaunda, in 1989. To this day, the Russians are given much credit in mineral and oil-rich South Africa and Angola for this chain of events. However, Ramaphosa's position on the war has been met with significant domestic opposition, in no small part due to the poor execution of his efforts to thrust South Africa and Africa into the mix. With the food security of many African countries threatened by Russia's blockade of Ukrainian exports, Ramaphosa's government attempted to lead an African diplomatic entree into the war this summer. His stated objective was to mediate a peace agreement despite the fact that Western allies were increasing supplies to Kyiv. Despite meeting with leaders on both sides of the conflict, the South African-led African delegation's mission to Ukraine and Russia earlier this year resulted in no breakthroughs toward peace. When one of the South African planes was stopped on the runway at Warsaw's Chopin Airport, it caused an embarrassing scene. Authorities in Poland claim that the delegation largely disregarded the itinerary they had previously agreed upon with their hosts. The South African representatives had no business bringing the plane full of potentially lethal materials into the country. Further, the Polish side was not informed in advance of the presence of certain individuals on board the aircraft, according to a government statement. Despite playing host to the BRICS summit, South Africa's efforts to influence the conflict in Ukraine have been met with more derision and confusion than tangible results. Protesters in Niger have converged on the French embassy while waving Russian flags, and the world is trying to figure out what role Russia is playing in the coup there. There, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, is mobilizing a massive counter-effort to the coup. Kuleba of Ukraine has announced a renaissance, and he has named several countries as participants.